We know it can be tempting to swap in dried herbs when a recipe calls for fresh. After all, they're a lot more convenient and a lot cheaper than buying bunches of fresh herbs from the supermarket. So we decided to look into the matter more thoroughly. We wanted to find out when this swap would really be acceptable. So we purchased a lot of different herbs, both fresh and dried. We got basil, cilantro, chives, dill, oregano, parsley, rosemary, sage, tarragon, and thyme. We then cooked our way through 24 recipes, including marinades, sauces, and braises, making each with the fresh and dried herbs and comparing differences in flavor. A common criticism of dried herbs was they lost many of the subtleties and nuances of fresh herbs. They tasted dusty and stale. Meanwhile, fresh herbs tasted clean and bright. In all but one application, tasters preferred the fresh herbs to dry. That one exception, dried oregano and chili, a combination we're so familiar with that fresh oregano actually tasted out of place. So beyond this instance, there were a handful of times in which some dried herbs made decent substitutes. Dried rosemary, sage, and thyme also fared reasonably well in recipes involving fairly long cooking times, so we're talking more than 20 minutes, and a good amount of liquid, such as in soups and stews. What explains why some dried herbs worked better than others? Well, the principal flavor compounds in herbs fall into a handful of categories: hydrocarbons, aldehydes, ketones, phenols, alcohols, and esters. Now within each category, some compounds are volatile, meaning they're very fragile and therefore easily lost to the heat of the drying process and cooking. On the other hand, some compounds are stable, which means they don't change at high temperatures and are thus able to maintain their flavor under those exact same conditions. The flavor compounds found in what we call delicate herbs, and we're talking about basil, cilantro, chives, dill, parsley, and tarragon, tend to be more volatile. Hence, the fresh form always performs better than the dried. In contrast, the dominant flavor compounds in the herbs that work really pretty well when dried, which are rosemary, oregano, sage, and thyme, they're non-volatile, and they better survive drying and cooking. Dried herbs are best used in recipes with ample liquid because moisture will hydrate their cells, which makes them able to release more of their aroma compounds. But even in ideal circumstances for dried herbs, they will always have a slightly dusty, stale flavor because the drying process leads to oxidation. So, when a recipe calls for delicate herbs or uses them raw to finish a dish, it's best to stick with fresh. However, if a recipe calls for heartier herbs, such as rosemary, oregano, sage, or thyme, the dried form can work. Just keep in mind that ounce for ounce, dried herbs are more potent than fresh. Our testing, in which we used only newly purchased jars of herbs, showed us that using 1 part dried herb to 3 parts fresh came closest to producing flavors of equal strength. This is the science of good cooking.